Hey, everybody, welcome to Crackpot, the podcast for each and every week. We dive into a different conspiracy theory and we discuss the merits or the demerits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach.
Howdy, Zach.
Welcome back, my man.
Appreciate it.
Sup?
Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a joke that only you and I know.
Thank you.
Probably.
Oh, no, my sons know it too.
Okay, good. So
Yeah.
when they tune in, they will also laugh.
That's right. Like, why does they always make that joke? Anyways.
So I wanted to go back to the basics, back to the roots of the podcast, back to the, the comfortable setting.
Well, when you say back to basics, I immediately think, okay, you got to have the number 2 in there. So it's back, then it's number 2.
2
basics. With either an X or like a...
X and basics.
There we go.
Yeah. Back to basics. Let's talk about a alien abduction story that we have not specifically talked about. I'm sure we have referenced this numerous times. Kind of surprised me when I realized we haven't talked about this because it's one of the more famous. And if you didn't already see, we're talking about the Pascagoula abduction in 1973. Off the top of your head, does this ring a bell? Do you know anything? I'm sure you will as we start talking about it, but does that ring a bell?
The name, yes, and I'm sure as I hear the details of it, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I know this one. But, yeah, offhand, I know the name, and I know it's a significant one, and that's about it.
Yeah, this is one of the more famous, and we're talking, when I say famous, we're talking about, like, Barney and Betty Hill, Travis Walton, Whitley Strieber, some of the Bud Hopkins stories. This one has multiple witnesses. All sorts of third-party evidence, very bizarre setting, and it's just kind of unsettling. Nothing good happens.
Oh,
as usually is the case with an alien abduction. But it all starts back on October 11th, 1973. Which was a Thursday, if you're keeping track at home, in Pascagula, Mississippi. Pascagoula is a little town on the Gulf. So we're talking southern United States, right on the Gulf, southernmost point of one of the southernmost states. 2 gentlemen, after work, were out fishing. You had Charles Hickson, 42 years old, and Calvin Parker, who was 19 at the time. Charles, the 42-year-old, he was the shipyard foreman. He was a Korean War vet. These 2 guys, they worked together at the same place. As a matter of fact, so Calvin, who's 19, this was his first week on the job. His father knew Charles from back in the day, and Calvin had gotten engaged to his high school sweetheart not too long before, and he lived up in the northern part of Mississippi, and he needed to start making money because he's going to start a new life with his new wife. And his dad called in a few favors, and he said, Charles Hickson down there, he got you a job. You can go live with him, go stay with him, work in the shipyard, make your money, come back and marry your beautiful bride. Sounds like a plan. This is Thursday. This is his 4th day on the job, right?
Okay.
And you can kind of picture what the work is like on a shipyard in southern Mississippi. These 2 guys, the whistle blows and they punch out and they decide to go grab a 6-pack and they want to just go fishing, blow off some steam. Because what else are you going to do in Pascagoula on a Thursday afternoon, right?
Yeah, let's face it, right?
So they go to this little spot that Charles knew about. It's kind of this old steel pier that goes a little bit into the river, into the Pascagoula River. And they're just casually talking, having a few drinks, throwing their lines out in the water. No bites, though. And Calvin is just kind of like, should we move? Should we go somewhere else? You just want to call it a night? And Charles, the old timer that he is at 42, he says, nah, it's fine, man. It's fine. It's the journey, not the destination, as you quickly learn when you fish. But nevertheless, they're out there and they're just doing their thing. And it starts to get dark, of course. Calvin looks up and he sees these blue lights kind of reflecting off the water. And he thinks to himself, he's like, oh, crap. It's the fuzz.
Sure.
It's the heat.
That's right.
It's the cops. Because super technically, they're fishing on private property. They shouldn't be there. And yeah, I mean, hey, It's Pascagoula, Mississippi. It's not like they're going to be hauled into jail or something and spend a week there waiting for their arraignment. It's probably just a local cop that's like, oh, move along. But anyway, see the blue lights on the water. He's just like, oh, shoot, make a note of it. But no cop car ever comes. So that's weird.
Okay.
And then they start to both hear this kind of whirring, buzzing noise.
Uh-oh.
And it's not crickets, it's not cicadas, it's not traffic, but it's certainly there, and they can both hear it. It's definitely a real sound, and they're like, what is going on? And then they look up in the sky, and they see, floating above the river, a 30 to 40 foot wide oval object that's about 8 to 10 feet tall. They both say it looks kind of like a football. That's more or less how they describe it, just this oblong, rounded oval shape. Metallic, with 2 blue lights blinking off the sides. That's crazy. We could stop right there, and that's crazy enough, right?
That's enough. I'm done. No, but that's pretty typical for UFO accounts, right?
Right.
Seeing the lights, hearing or experiencing some sort of buzzing, vibration, sound, whatever that is.
Yep.
And then, of course, like a metallic-looking object. Sometimes this almost sounds like either like something between like an egg shape and like a cigar shape or something like that.
Something like that.
Very
exactly.
typical. So, okay.
Exactly. All right. So the craft comes closer to them, and by now they're both, of course, fully engrossed. Like it has their full attention, as anything anyone would feel in that situation. And they both state that they were fully conscious at this point. However, they were paralyzed. And they couldn't really tell, at least at this point, whether they were frozen from fear or whether they were actually paralyzed through some sort of alien hypnotic whatever. Nevertheless, fully conscious, couldn't move, and this thing moves closer towards them. And then they describe that the front of the craft doesn't open, it doesn't slide, it doesn't drop down, it just kind of dematerializes, and 3 creatures come out of the craft and hover toward them.
Whoa.
I mean, they don't walk, they don't glide, or I guess they glide, but they hover towards them, and they describe them as moving robotically. So not a fluid movement with their being, but moving robotically. They said that their skin was gray and wrinkly like an elephant skin. They said that they didn't have hands as much as they had crab-like pincers. And at this point, they were absolutely terrified, completely out of their wits, until they got close enough to grab them by their arms with their pincers. And at that moment, an unnatural calm came over both of their bodies.
Crab-like claws.
You're right.
Elephant-like skin. Usually you hear it's like a shiny, tight, silver, almost like a suit or whatever.
Exactly.
We're
going to get more into that in a moment. So hold that thought about what they look like, because that definitely plays into this, and it's incredibly fascinating. But grabbed them by the arms and basically floated them back into the craft, at which point they more or less black out. Okay. But yes, these 3 creatures, like I said, gray, elephant-like, wrinkly skin. The head was bullet-shaped. Okay. No neck. The head rested like directly on the shoulders, about 5 feet tall. And then they described him as having 1 leg and 1 foot. I mean, they said it was 2 legs and 2 feet, but they were bound together, so it looked more like 1, if that makes sense. No ears, no nose, no mouth. They might have had eyes, but it was hard to tell with just kind of the wrinkly nature of their skin and their face.
I've never heard anything like this.
Exactly. Which is fascinating. It is interesting. And I would argue, as you'll see, might even play more into the credibility of this all as it unfolds. The other thing I should say, I will post pictures of this on Instagram and wherever else. Go on your phone or your computer, wherever you're listening to this right now. Pull up the pictures of them, because if you Google Pascagoula abduction creatures, you will see the artist rendition of these, and they are not like anything you've ever seen before. The other thing I should note is that they had pointy protrusions on their head where like the nose and the ears and the eyes kind of should have been.
Okay.
One person described it as almost like if you were to pull like a pantyhose kind of over your face. Like you can see where the nose is, but it's just kind of a
protuberance, like you said.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
So they get on the craft, they wake up, and they do these tests, and we'll get into some of those tests in a moment. One of the interesting things after these beings or creatures, whatever they are, they do the tests, a giant mechanical eye comes out of the wall and basically scans their entire body and then just kind of vanishes back into the wall. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Those are the facts as I have them. Thoughts, questions, or concerns?
It's sounding a bit like the basis for the Flight of the Navigator. I'm just
that's cool.
Kind of envisioning a similar type craft and some weird eye thing. Yeah, I don't know. This is weird. This is weird.
It is weird because it has elements that are very traditional to the alien abduction story, and it has elements that are just completely different.
That's why I'm struggling with this one a bit. And one thought that comes to mind, and maybe this is, maybe it's irrelevant, maybe it's not even a point worth making, but it's like perhaps these were like screen memories. Like the appearance was altered as a screen memory.
Sure.
Something like, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's just so different, but...
The creatures themselves are completely different than anything else you and I have ever talked about, read about, seen in a movie or a documentary or a TV show or anything else. Like, what are these things? Makes no sense. Zach, there are similar creatures that people have described in the past that match these descriptions.
Oh, weird.
Check this out. Check this out. So in the early 1950s, there was a couple who was driving on the Pan American Highway to a location in Peru. And along the way, they saw a shining metallic disc hovering over the side of the highway. And then 3 entities exited the craft, and the beings did not appear to exit from a visible door, but simply arrived in front of them. Sounds like this, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but get this. This is quoting one of the witnesses. They looked like 3 mummies. They had the profile of human beings, but their legs were joined. They did not have 2 legs, but one double one, like twins.
Huh.
Okay. This next account is from a sighting, an event that happened in 1949. It was written about in 1952. It wasn't published until 1968. Could these 2 men in Mississippi have seen these? I suppose it's possible. Nothing is necessarily impossible, but I highly doubt it. Anyway, listen to this. So 1949 encounter, Jim and Coral Lorenz's. This is from a book called UFOs Over the Americas. They talked about these creatures they saw having strange skin, a sort of towely, sandy-colored skin. The head had no features at all, except about the height of the eyes. There was an oblong substance like jelly with a sort of a bubble in the center. No ears, no mouth, no nose, no nothing. They sort of looked like if you were to pass a tight stocking over your face. They had 2 legs that were joined together. Have you ever seen twin bananas? You know, the form of both bananas, but they're joined together. That's what it looked like. The 2 feet were bandaged together, so it also looked like 1 foot.
That's weird.
It is weird.
So maybe this type of an alien, if you will,
yep,
has been seen before.
Exactly.
It's just not really well documented.
Exactly.
Ugh.
So if I were to tell you the story, 2 guys, southern Mississippi, out fishing, drinking a couple beers, they see these gray aliens with almond-shaped eyes come out of the craft. It's like, oh yeah, heard that 1,000 times. I believe it. No big deal.
Right.
But you hear something slightly different. You're like, well, that doesn't check all the boxes in my mental list of how an abduction works. But then you dig into it, and it's like, oh my gosh, this actually is more credible potentially, because they're describing something that is so far out of left field. There's no way they could have come up with this on their own.
I'm just scratching my head.
Yeah.
Okay.
So keep that in mind. Once these two men, Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, got on board their craft, they were separated. One went to the left and one went to the right. Calvin, the younger, he said that he fainted, and until he did hypnotic regression much, much, much later, he said he had no memory of what happened on board. So keep that in mind. Charles, however, he stated that he was perfectly awake the entire time and remembered most, if not all of it. But he said that he was in a very bright, round room on a cold metal flat table, and there was a smell about the craft like ozone and ammonia.
Always ozone, always ammonia.
Always a bright, round room and a flat metal table and so on and so forth. Like, all those also check out completely. Right. Now we're going to talk about Kelvin's memories, and I apologize that this is kind of out of order, at least chronologically, how it all happened, but this is hypnotic regression. Calvin talking about what he remembered. He said he woke up and those three creatures were no longer there. This time it was a female or a feminine type alien. He didn't know how he knew this, except he could just sense that it was feminine in nature. But anyway, this female alien had almond-shaped eyes, had blonde hair, and tried to calm him telepathically. And again, this is another instance where this person telling the story doesn't necessarily know the term telepathic. It's like, she's talking to me, but I can't hear it, but I can hear it inside my brain. One of those things, which is just, I love it, because to me, at least, it adds that much more credibility. But anyway, she says to him, I'm not going to hurt you, just be calm. And at which point she pinched his cheek and slid her hand down his throat. And at that point, she either had one finger that was much longer than the others, or a probe maybe came out of one of her fingers and went into his nasal cavity and seemed to extract something from it.
Oof.
No idea.
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah, right. He said it was very painful. He passed out again, but as he was passing out, or before he passed out, he just got this mental download of thousands and thousands of human faces, one after the other, all with faces and expressions of complete terror. And he's like, I didn't know if these were, this was an image of what was to come, or this is what happened, or what. He did later have a distinct feeling that these were also people who had experienced the same thing. He's like, I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
So, take that with an extra large grain of salt. But he had the impression that he was not the first one to be abducted like this. It had been thousands and thousands before him.
Yeah, my first thought was perhaps he's, seeing other people that have gone through this experience before.
Right.
Maybe it was either by accident, the being communicated that to him,
right,
or maybe it was intentional. I don't know.
Yeah,
that is terrifying though.
Okay, so let's go to Charles's side of the craft. Charles, he's in a different room. He said the aliens were moving robotically around him. Some of them were watching him, some of them were examining him, some of them seemed to just be kind of directing traffic, more or less. You know what? Let's go ahead and play this recording. This is taken a period of time after the abduction. He ended up recording his account on a 45. And I guess you can still find them out there. So, hey, guys, if you have a copy of this, let me know, because I would love to hear it. But anyway, check this out.
The craft hovered about 2 foot from the ground, and almost instantly an opening appeared at one end. And there's no way for me to express the feelings I had when these three things appeared in that opening. My God, Calvin, what's happened? I'll never forget those words. As I glanced toward Calvin, he seemed to be going in shock. He's 2 inches tall. The head seemed to come directly to the shoulders without a neck. The nose was about 1.5 inches long, and he came to a point. The ears were similar to the nose, maybe a little longer. And directly under the nose was a slit. It resembled a mouth. There could have been eyes. I can't recall what they looked like. Their skin, or it could have been some type of clothing, reminds me of elephant skin, and it was very wrinkled, and it seemed to shine. The arms resembled human arms, but the hands were webbed with something like a thumb, more like pincers, and the arms were long in proportion to the body. The legs remained together, and the feet seemed to be round, like an elephant's foot. And these things seemed to glide about the same height from the ground as the craft, and almost instantly were upon us. 2 of them took hold of my arms from the side.
So here you have Charles Hickson, 42 years old, talking about what he saw and how he describes these creatures. I don't know. Anything to add to that? Or
Well, I would encourage everyone to, Google search this, just the imagery, because I was looking at that while he was talking about what they were seeing, and it is so weird, man.
It's weird.
It's very,
very
weird.
odd.
Yeah.
So Charles said that while he's on board, while they're doing these tests, they were using their fingers to examine his body. He said at one point they were probing his mind for thoughts and memories. And he said he tried to resist them. He tried to block them out of his mind, but it was completely futile. They got in, they got whatever information they wanted. He said, at this point, the metal sphere or the eyeball floated around his body, and as they were doing tests. And he also says he was able to look around the room a little bit, and he saw screens and consoles, and the screens were blinking and flashing, and there were some holographic images with what he described as letters. But the letters, according to him, looked much more like hieroglyphics than, the Roman alphabet, for example.
Sure. Huh. Again, another theme.
It's weird. He also said that he had the distinct sense that the craft itself was alive and sentient and probing their minds.
Huh. We've heard this before.
Right.
I don't remember where, but we've heard this before.
And again, it's like, who knows? Sure. There's absolutely no way of finding that out. But it's a very interesting thought to have. Okay. Therein is the abduction that happens. That's it. That's the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Okay.
Because they woke up on the riverbank, not too far away from the pier where they were abducted from. And check their watch, only 20 minutes had passed. They said hours and hours. They were on that thing for, lifetimes. It's like, I can't imagine what that would be like. He's like, oh, no. I mean, it was definitely more than 20 minutes. I don't know how long it was, but certainly felt like hours. So they kind of come to, they wake up, they look at each other. They're like, what just happened? Calvin is freaked out. He is terrified. He is just literally shaking. And he says, we cannot tell anyone what happened. This stays between you and me. We need to forget this ever happened. They're having this conversation. Charles isn't quite as convinced they shouldn't talk to anyone, but they go back to the truck. They take out some whiskey just to calm their nerves, if anything, have a few drinks. And Charles is like, look, we don't have to run with this, but we do have to tell someone. Mm-hmm. So they decide to call the Air Force Base. So they call Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, which is only about 20 or 30 miles west, also on the Gulf Coast there. And they call up the Air Force Base, and they're like, You're not going to believe this, but me and my buddy's kid here just got abducted by aliens. And whoever was on the other end was like, yeah, this doesn't really interest us. You know, if you're concerned or scared or something else, call the police, but we can't help you. So he hangs up and he's like, okay, I think we have to call the police. Sure enough, they call the Jackson County Sheriff Department and they told him to come in. So this is probably not more than an hour or two after the event. Okay, so after the actual abduction, they are sitting in the police station. They are sitting in an interrogation room, visibly frightened, scared, shaking, telling the most outlandish story that a police officer has probably ever heard. Mm-hmm. And the cops are like, this doesn't make sense, but you are coming across as believable and scared, but like none of this is actually believable. So the sheriff decides that they're going to hide a recording device in the room, unbeknownst to Calvin and Charles. Little voice-acted tape recorder, slide it in the desk, and they're like, okay, guys, we're going to go kind of take a little bathroom break, grab a cup of coffee. We'll be back in a few minutes. Why don't you just, whatever. They leave, and they're like, now we got them. They're going to say, oh, those sheriff, they'll believe anything. And, isn't this story great? It seems to be going so well. They were fully convinced that they would admit that everything was a lie and a fabrication. When they played back the tape, the exact opposite occurred. I have a snippet of this. It's called The Secret Recording. Obviously, it wasn't secret for very long, but it's called The Secret Recording because it's a voice-activated tape recorder in a desk from 50 years ago. It's not the best audio quality, but bear with me. I'm going to play part of this here. So listen in, and I think you will agree.
You hear about something like that, but you can't believe it.
Yeah, he hears that. I know. But
there is something the United States can have up there.
No,
They wouldn't have done no
not what we see, though. Not what we see. It's something, and the Air Force and all know it's up there, too, see. And this ain't going to be the only time this going to happen again.
This shit, I'm not had a heart attack tonight, I ain't shit.
Well, I know.
I come one down and
I know that scared me to death, too, something.
I'm just laying there crying right now. I can't tell
I know that. Jesus Christ.
I'm so damn bad about it, nobody's leaving. That's
And
what
I
I'm
thought I had been through enough of hell on this earth, and now I have to go through something like that, see. But they could have, I guess they could have harmed us, son. They could have done anything to us if they didn't hurt me.
maybe why they just picked us.
I don't know.
I can sleep about like it is, but I'm just laying here crazy.
But Cal, when they brought you out of that damn thing, and when they brought me out, well, I like to know where the hell God damn, I like to know where the hell got you straightened out, man.
I didn't know it, I remember my heart, they just froze out just like that, and I couldn't move, just like I was stepping on a damn rattlesnake. I passed out. I passed out. That's the first time I ever passed out in my life. I can't figure out the damn door. You see how that door will come around on that side of the chair?
Yeah, I don't know how to open something. I don't know.
I didn't see no door swing.
I don't know how to open. I don't know how to
shit on it. All right, you see
something like
and look around, and them damn blue lights and them son of bitches are just like that, they come out.
Yeah, I know. You can't believe it. You can't make people believe it.
I paralyzed right there. I couldn't move.
They won't believe it one of these days. They won't believe it one of these days. Might be too late. I knew all along there was people from out of the world up there. I knew all along.
Okay, so not the easiest to understand. I'm sure, hopefully you could pick out a few of the words here and there, but more than the words themselves is just kind of the mood behind this, their emotions. I mean, tell us what you heard.
What is really striking about that recording is just like how authentic their experience was and how they reacted to it and how they were both still trying to make sense of whatever happened.
Right.
It was like they're just kind of like talking out loud, like, okay, well, wait, what about this? I don't know. It's just like this. Like, we literally don't know what we just experienced, but we experienced something. And that, to me, that makes it authentic.
It really does. So, nevertheless, cops come back, and they listen to this tape later, and I don't know if anyone officially from the Jackson County Sheriff's Department is on the record saying that they believe in UFOs and aliens and abductions, but they took it a lot more serious after this. And they were like, you know what? At the end of the day, we believe that you believe this, so we are going to we're going to do what we can to help you out. They ended up asking the two of them to take polygraph tests. They both passed. And their stories, Calvin and Charles's stories, stayed more or less consistent until the days they each died. So it adds to that credibility issue, and it's just oddly fascinating.
Yeah, and that's another striking theme that comes up where, or I think when you have very credible UFO abductions where the story just doesn't really change.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how much time passes, how crazy it sounds, they keep coming back to the same story, and it's remarkably consistent.
So one of the things to keep in mind, and we're not going to harp on this for too long, but one of the things people point to when they talk about this and they try to discredit it is that they were both drinking. They both smelled like booze, and they had both obviously been drinking.
Sure.
Zach, you're 40-something. Over the last 20 years that you've legally been able to drink alcohol, have you ever been intoxicated?
Yes, I have, Your
Okay,
Honor.
so at these times or time, potentially, when you were intoxicated, did you ever see or hear things that were not actually there?
You know what's funny? Well, not aliens or alien crafts. Especially with this level of detail. Yeah, no, not like this.
Okay. As far as I know, alcohol is not a hallucinogenic drug. Might do a lot of other things, but I don't think that's one of them. So anyway,
right.
Back to the station. Back to the police station. So you got these group of cops or whoever, I don't know how many, they're talking to them, they're interrogating them, they're asking them questions and so on and so forth. In another part of the building, there's the receptionist who's answering the phone, the 911 of the day. Like, yeah, hey, Jackson County Sheriff's Department, how can I help you? Over 50 calls that same evening. People were calling in saying that they were seeing a large metallic oval-shaped object in the sky with blinking blue lights.
Dang it.
I know. At the time, these two parts of the police station were not talking to each other.
Oh my goodness.
So you had the guy answering the phone. I was like, yeah, okay, ma'am, sure thing. We'll make a note of it. I was like, yeah, okay, what's going on? What are people seeing up there, And these two guys are like, we were taken on board a craft. It was oval-shaped. There were blue blinking lights. Like, I swear this is real. They're like, yeah, sure you did, pal. Jeez. What is going on?
Wow.
The next day, dozens more people came in because they didn't really want to call necessarily, but hey, it's a small town. They probably know a lot of these guys in there. They're like, hey, Joe, I know this is going to sound crazy, and I didn't want to bug you last night because I know how busy Thursday nights in Pascagula can get, but last night I saw XYZ. And they're like, okay, I'll make it. Like, what do you even do at that point? What do you even do? But you talk about credibility. You have like an entire town essentially seeing this same thing in the sky. And these two people saw this thing and were brought on board. As fantastical as that sounds, it's like you can't come up with a scenario that could make this more credible.
I'm trying to think of other abduction cases where this type of a thing has happened. And it's rare. It's rare, but it has happened where people have this experience And it's more or less corroborated by other people that have seen at least a craft or something they can't explain.
Yeah.
They didn't maybe have the exact same experience, but they saw something. And it actually just completely lended credibility to the account of the person that was abducted.
Exactly. I didn't mention this, but one of my sources said that one of the 50 people who called in was a local prominent clergyman. So, again,
No reason to lie.
No reason to lie. No reason to lie about metallic crafts hovering in the sky, minimally. Sheriff's Department decided that they should probably go to the hospital for some tests. They go to the hospital. They get a full workup. Everything seems to be normal, but the hospital decides to send these two gentlemen to the Air Force Base to get checked for radiation, randomly enough. So they go to the Air Force Base. They get checked for radiation. And then while they're at the Air Force Base, rather than just saying, no, thank you, this is not in our purview, a couple gentlemen come in and say, tell us what you saw.
Oh, no. Seriously?
Yeah. And what's interesting about this is that there was, at least according to Calvin and Charles, no recording that was made, but they did bring in a stenographer. So theoretically, somewhere out there is the question and answer period at the Air Force Base when this happened. So, okay, where does that take us? How do we go forward? I don't know.
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? So Calvin Parker. Calvin Parker is an interesting cat. So remember, he's 19. His dad is friends with this Charles dude. He tried desperately to distance himself from this whole experience for literally the rest of his life. In 2018, he finally decided to do some hypnotic regression. He ended up writing a book. He came to terms with who he was in this story and what it all meant, and he passed away in 2021. But from 1973 until 2018, he wanted nothing to do with it, to the extent that he was jumping from town to town. When people would find out who he was, and interviews would start coming in and people would start asking questions, he would just literally get up and leave.
Wow.
He was actually, he was fired from one job for using a false name and a fake social security number. Like that's how far he went to try to distance himself from the Calvin Parker who was abducted on October 11th. But okay, so remember, he came down to the shipyard to make money because he just got recently engaged, right? So he still needed his fiance's father's permission to marry her. So he was 19. His fiance was 16. So he needed parental permission. And like one of the biggest concerns in his mind was, oh my God, if my future father-in-law finds out that I'm talking about aliens and spaceships, there's no way he will let me marry his daughter. Once that passes, once they got married, he was still obviously afraid of the stigma that attached to him. But he was incredibly mad at Charles for most of his life because he just didn't want the attention. And Charles was like, this is the most amazing thing that has ever happened, potentially in the history of mankind. Yeah. I need to tell everyone.
Wow.
So,
this is bizarre.
It is, but I mean, you get both those sides of coins when it comes to scenarios like this. You get the people that don't ever want to talk about it again, push it down deep within their subconscious. It becomes a repressed memory sometimes, and you get people that join the talk show circuit and write a book and go on shows and all sorts of stuff. Calvin, he ended up leaving his job. He at the shipyard, of course. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, when he got home that night, the night of the abduction, got back to the house, he took off all his clothes and then threw them away and washed himself in the shower with bleach for over an hour.
Oh, my God.
Because he just felt violated, essentially. Anyway, he ended up suffering significant PTSD from the event. He was in and out of the hospital for at least the first year, and then in subsequent years later on, it would just relapse. He ended up joining the Marines to get away from the media, and he just kind of traveled from town to town, just trying to escape it. Charles on the other hand, as I mentioned, he just kept talking about the incident up until the day he died in 2011. We heard the 45 recording that he made of kind of what these things looked like. He did multiple interviews in the days and weeks afterwards with national newspapers and TV stations. He was just kind of the face of the event. And people, at least locally, believed him because he was a long-standing member of the community. He was the foreman of the shipyard. Like, he was a credible witness. So at least locally, people are like, holy crap, what's going on?
Right.
I don't know how this played in New York and San Francisco when the guy who sounds like Boomhauer, starts talking about aliens necessarily. But nevertheless, he maintained the story up until the day he died. He said that he had more encounters throughout the year. Maybe that takes away credibility. Maybe it lends more. This is kind of a common occurrence in some of these accounts. He said that he was abducted again in 1974 by a tall Nordic female alien who talked about peace and unity. He said he got an implant in his body in 1983. Some of his stories just kind of got more and more detailed as the years went on. So maybe he just kind of embellished.
Yeah, or some sort of mental break, perhaps.
Could
but the initial story...
The initial story
checks out.
It really does. Okay. So that's the abduction. That's what happened to the two individuals who were directly affected. But I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Tim, come on. Who else saw this?
Yeah.
Because we have those accounts. People were calling in left and right. What else happened in that community that night? Well, let me tell you about a car that was parked in downtown Pascagoula. Two couples were inside, 4 people, of course. They were just parked at an intersection, kind of near the shipyard, not terribly close, not too far away, and parked at the intersection. And one of them noticed that these blue lights were coming up behind the car, and it was like, well, what is that? What is? And they all kind of turn around, and they, sure enough, noticed this metallic object just slowly floating over the street. And the closer it gets to the car, the louder the radio gets, and then the radio starts like changing channels and gets louder, and then it goes complete static. The craft is right above them. Radio goes out completely, keeps moving, goes kind of over the hill or whatever the case might be, and the radio comes back on, and they're all just like, whoa, what just happened?
No kidding.
In and of itself, of course, it's a wild, fantastic story, but it's not, stop the presses kind of news, but taken in conjunction with everything else, that's weird. Then there are 2 other people also on the Pascagoula River at the same time that they were fishing. Okay, so this couple, this is Maria and Jerry Blair. They are married. They're both 23 years old. Jerry is going to go out on his fishing trawler. He's waiting for it to come in and pick him up, and Maria's just waiting there with him. And they're waiting, and the boat's not coming in. But while they're waiting, they decide to walk down the pier on the other side of the river as the 2 fishermen. And as they're walking down the pier, Maria said that she remembers seeing an airplane circling in the sky above them that, quote, appeared to be lost because it kept circling around and never landed, which doesn't make sense. It sounds like dream logic almost, like, oh yeah, and then there's an airplane and it was lost. Like, what does that even look like? But anyway, that's what she recalled. And then she said as they were walking down this pier, it seemed like something like apparated out of the water onto the pier and then quickly vanished. And then she heard a splash like 20 feet away again in the water. She's like, I don't know what that was. I don't know what to make of it. It could be a complete coincidence. I have no idea. But they got to the end of the pier. They turned around. They walked back to the car because they didn't see the boat yet. And they got back in the car. But when they got back in the car, 4 hours had passed from when they left the car. A simple 5-minute jaunt to the end of the pier turned into 4 hours.
Classic. Missing time.
And so they both kind of sat with that for a while, but she said as her husband was dying many, many years later on his deathbed, he said, hey, you remember that night when we had that missing time and there was that abduction case and the UFO and all that stuff? She's like, yeah, I remember that. He said to her, we were abducted that night. And she's like, oh my God, tell me more. And he's like, I won't. I can't and I won't. And he never did. And then he passed away, and that's just all she's left with. So,
That's
okay.
like tragic.
It's maybe she's better not knowing any of that information. But nevertheless, you have two people who had never thought about or considered, most likely, aliens or abductions or UFOs or anything like this, furthest thing from their mind. Suddenly they're in the middle of it. They have these very distinct memories that are corroborated by multiple witnesses. They, whether they like it or not, appear to have been in this place at that time, potentially on board a craft, interacting with creatures from, well, I don't know, not Earth. What do you make of all this?
I'll tell you this much. I believe them.
I believe them too. I straight up believe them. It's
an-
one of the more credible stories we've ever talked about.
I would agree with that. There's enough. There are enough independent witnesses, disinterested witnesses, not to mention the detail that they went into about the whole experience, that I would say something happened that night. It was probably some sort of alien abduction. And that's about all we really know.
Exactly.
But it sounds real.
Okay. If it's not real, if we ignore all the eyewitnesses that phoned in and saw craft, if we ignore the people across the river and the people in the car and all that other stuff, we say, what could have happened? How do two relatively normal, sane-sounding people come up with such a fantastical story as this? What's the explanation? You got to start thinking maybe it's some sort of hypnagogic hallucination where it's that period in time that is just between sleep and just between being awake, where everything is incredibly vivid and your subconscious starts playing with images and everything else, and it seems real. It seems incredibly real. Mm-hmm. Maybe it could be that. If not that, maybe it's sleep paralysis, right? We've talked about sleep paralysis, where people report seeing these shadow creatures, or the Hat Man, or the old hag. Mm-hmm. And again, it's this period where you're asleep, but you're not asleep, but you're paralyzed. I mean, hey, they both talked about being paralyzed, right?
Yeah.
They both talked about a tremendous amount of fear, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's something like that.
It feels to me like too much of a stretch. Like, I know where you're going with this, and I think it makes sense because those are the only kind of parallels in the paranormal space that we've covered that maybe could explain some of this stuff. But here's what I'll tell you. They're fishing. Probably the middle of the day, or what? 6 o'clock.
Yeah, 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there.
I don't think they both fell asleep and experienced the same sleep paralysis.
Also, I don't think it's possible for two people to have the same hallucination.
Yeah, not to this degree.
Not to this degree. Yeah. And also, in that hypothetical where we're just kind of brainstorming, we are completely discrediting the dozens and dozens of people who saw something in the sky blinking and flashing lights. I just don't know. So if their memory's not distorted by alcohol and their vision and everything else isn't a distortion of alcohol, if they weren't hallucinating
or lying,
what are we talking about?
Well, that's why I said I think maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's real. Maybe it really happened.
To come back to like what these creatures looked like again, I find it so fascinating that just the image of these wrinkly elephant-like skin creatures lends more credibility than takes away, because these creatures' descriptions do not exist in science fiction. Mm-hmm. They just don't. So when you take Barney and Betty Hill, for example, when they talked about the aliens they saw on their craft, a couple people were able to say, oh, those look a lot like that TV show that aired 3 nights before on this station. Maybe they somehow incorporated that into their vivid hallucination. It's like, that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. You could maybe say that if they were, 4 foot tall, spindly aliens with almond-shaped eyes, but that wasn't the case. So it's like every single piece of this seems to point in the direction that maybe this actually happened. All right, guys. Well, I'd love to know what you all think, because I know there's a Netflix documentary out there that has this story in there now. So maybe you've heard this as well. Maybe you've read a book. Maybe this is something. Maybe you're from Pascagula, in which case you have to call in. You're legally obligated to send us a voice memo and tell us what you see when you're down there fishing off the pier. But before you do any of that, maybe head over to our Patreon. Zach, where can they find that?
Patreon.com/crackpotpodcast. Ad-free content, access to our entire catalog, plus a weekly bonus show. Hey, what's there not to love?
You get 2 shows every week. 2! That's a lot. Weekly. And, of course, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local fishermen about our podcast, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.